The largest mechanism used to implement the New World Order agenda is the worldwide secret society network. Politicians, bankers, businessmen, and media personalities, the biggest names in history and world affairs, form a huge secret society matrix. This hierarchical, pyramid-structured network is constantly recruiting and placing members in key influential positions. In order to orchestrate world events and policy decisions from behind the scenes, many niche secret societies groom and position politicians, media personalities, and other yes-men so they may best aid the great work. As A.E. Waite wrote, "Beneath the broad tide of human history, there flow the stealthy undercurrents of the secret societies, which frequently determine in the depths the changes that take place upon the surface." Or as Rush Limbaugh said, "You see, if you amount to anything in Washington these days, it is because you have been plucked or hand-picked from an Ivy League school, Harvard, Yale, Kennedy School of Government. You've shown an aptitude to be a good Ivy League type, and so you're plucked, so to speak, and you are assigned success. You are assigned a certain role in government somewhere, and then your success is monitored and tracked, and you go where the pluckers and the handpickers can put you. World leaders are made offers they cannot refuse, bribed, even blackmailed, or otherwise recruited and sworn into these secret societies. Then, often under blood oaths to which they remain loyal, these Brotherhood initiates follow orders throughout their terms in office. In this way, the electorate constantly changes, giving the illusion of discontinuity of leadership, when in fact, each successive leader, coincidentally, belongs to the same secret societies. A few of the more influential ones include the Freemasons, the Illuminati, Bohemian Grove, Skull and Bones, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, the Bilderberg Group, and the Trilateral Commission. Paul Joseph Watson wrote, "A disturbing majority of the House and Senate representatives hold membership to elite organizations publicly sworn to destroying America in favor of a globalist one-world order system. This trend ranges from the now public U.S.-centered Council on Foreign Relations through the Trilateral Commission to the quasi-secret internationalist Bilderberg Group. At the end of the spectrum, we even see occult influences like Skull and Bones, along with the Freemasons. The justification for a zealously ordered one-world government is chaos. Terrorism is the premier method for fomenting this chaos." David Icke wrote, "The conspiracy to create a centralized global fascist state is orchestrated in the 5 Cents world by a secret network known collectively as the Illuminati or Illuminated Ones. They manipulate through secret societies and groupings like the Freemasons, Knights of Malta, Knights Templar, and the Jesuits. These and others feed carefully chosen recruits into the Illuminati, and they are installed in positions of power throughout the world, infesting all colors, races, creeds, and countries. It is not that everyone in the secret societies is aware of the plot. The overwhelming majority are not. The Illuminati operate like a cancer to infiltrate and covertly control other organizations. Most Freemasons never progress higher than the bottom 3 levels of degree, the so-called blue degrees, and they don't realize what their organization is being used for. Just look at the recent U.S. presidents. George W. Bush, Mason and Skull and Bones, Bill Clinton, Mason, CFR, Bilderberg, Trilateral, George H.W. Bush, Mason, Committee of 300, Skull and Bones, CFR, Trilateral, Ronald Reagan, Mason, Knights of Malta, Jimmy Carter, Mason, CFR, Trilateral, Gerald Ford, Mason, CFR, and on it goes. Most every American president has belonged to one or many secret societies. Almost all America's founding fathers were Freemasons. The Senate has maintained a Masonic majority since its inception, and its influence has only become more pervasive since. To deny the influence secret societies have in world affairs is naive, but the mainstream media seem complicit in their exclusion of any coverage involving them. As shown previously, this mainstream media blackout is also maintained through secret society membership. The 5 largest multimedia providers controlling 90% of America's media are bloodline or secret society controlled. For example, the following are just a few of the hundreds of CFR, Trilateral, or Bilderberg owned and managed companies: ABC, CBS, NBC, PBS, CNN, AP, Reuters, New York Times, New York Post, Washington Times, LA Times, Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, Business Week, National Review, Time, Life, Look, Fortune, Reader's Digest, U.S. News and World Report, Atlantic Monthly, McCall's, World Review, and Scientific American. Not only are the media CEOs and boards of directors usually secret society members, so are the show hosts and news anchors. Here's a sampling of some mainstream anchors and media personalities found on secret society rosters: Peter Jennings, Dan Rather, Tom Brokaw, Ted Koppel, Barbara Walters, Diane Sawyer, William F. Buckley Jr., Joseph Harsh, Bill Myers, C.C. Collinwood, David Brinkley, John Chancellor, Marvin Kalb, Daniel Shore, Joseph Kraft, James Reston, Max Frankel, David Halberstrom, Harrison Salisbury, Sol Linowitz, George Will, Robert McNeil, David Gergen, and Mortimer Zuckerman. Jim Marrs wrote, "There can be no argument regarding the reality of secret societies today. The existence of groups like the Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations, and the Bilderbergers is well documented. The only question is the extent of their control and manipulation of major world events. Likewise, there is no question that members of these societies exert inordinate control over many of the largest corporations and banks in the world. These corporations, in turn, control essential minerals, energy, transportation, pharmaceuticals, agriculture, telecommunications, and entertainment. In other words, the basics of modern life. They also provide an inner core of ranking government officials on a revolving door basis. These officials often implement the very policies conceived and desired by the societies. These societies hold considerable sway over national elections and policy, yet seem strangely immune to any investigation, whether by government or the mass media. Since its inception in 1913, there has never been an outside, objective audit of the Federal Reserve System, despite periodic calls for such. After Bush was elected, he immediately placed 5 Skull and Bones brothers in his administration. Clinton and Nixon had over 100 CFR members in their administrations. Ronald Reagan's 59-man transition team alone had 28 CFR members, 10 Bilderbergers, and 10 Trilaterals. Secret society members are prevalent at all levels of government, and not just in America, but worldwide. For instance, Saddam Hussein, Yasser Arafat, Mikhail Gorbachev, George Bush, and Tony Blair are all 33rd degree Freemasons. Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, Trotsky, and Mao Zedong were all high-level Grand Orient Lodge Freemasons. Winston Churchill was Committee of 300 and a Mason. Cecil Rhodes founded the Round Table, was Committee of 300 and a Mason. Henry Kissinger was a Mason, Knight of Malta, Committee of 300, and a Bilderberger. Dick Cheney is CFR and Trilateral Commission. David Rockefeller founded Bilderberg and the Trilateral Commission, and is also CFR, Committee of 300, and a Mason. These are the biggest, most powerful names in politics, all meeting in secret, with no minutes and no media coverage. Our public servants making private policy decisions behind closed doors. This has been the rule, not the exception, for longer than most people realize. During the 19th century, British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli was quite outspoken regarding the influence of secret societies in politics. Quote, "The world is governed by very different personages from what is imagined by those who are not behind the scenes. There is in Italy a power which we seldom mention in this house. I mean the secret societies. It is useless to deny, because it is impossible to conceal, that a great part of Europe, the whole of Italy and France, and a great portion of Germany, to say nothing of other countries, is covered with a network of these secret societies, just as the superficies of the earth is now being covered with railroads. The government of this country has not only to deal with governments, kings, and ministers, but also with secret societies, elements which must be taken into account, which, at the last moment, can bring our plans to naught, which have everywhere their unscrupulous agents, who incite assassinations and can, if necessary, lead a massacre. The Federal Reserve Private Banking Syndicate was set up under Woodrow Wilson's presidency. The following quotes show his suspicions and regrets regarding this secret society of banking elites. Quote, "Since I entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confided to me privately. Some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere, so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men." British Prime Minister Winston Churchill was a Committee of 300 member and 33rd degree Mason. In 1920, he spoke from personal knowledge regarding the world conspiracy when he said, quote, "From the days of Spartacus Weishaupt to those of Karl Marx, to those of Trotsky, Bela Kun, Rosa Luxemburg, and Emma Goldman, this worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization and for the reconstitution of society on the basis of arrested development, of envious malevolence and impossible equality, has been steadily growing. It played a definitely recognizable role in the tragedy of the French Revolution. It has been the mainspring of every subversive movement during the 19th century. And now, at last, this band of extraordinary personalities from the underworld of the great cities of Europe and America have gripped the Russian people by the hair of their heads and have become practically the undisputed masters of that enormous empire." New York Mayor John Hylan in 1922 said, "The real menace of our republic is the invisible government, which like a giant octopus sprawls its slimy legs over our cities, states, and nation. At the head is a small group of banking houses. This little coterie runs our government for their own selfish ends. It operates under cover of a self-created screen, seizes our executive officers, legislative bodies, schools, courts, newspapers, and every agency created for the public protection." President Franklin Roosevelt said, "The real truth of the matter is that a financial element in the large centers has owned the government since the days of Andrew Jackson." Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter said, "The real rulers in Washington are invisible and exercise power from behind the scenes." Senator William Jenner said, "Today the path to total dictatorship in the United States can be laid by strictly legal means, unseen and unheard by Congress, the President, or the people. Outwardly, we have a constitutional government. We have been operating within our government and political system, another body representing another form of government, a bureaucratic elite which believes our Constitution is outmoded and is sure that it is the winning side. All the strange developments in the foreign policy agreements may be traced to this group, who are going to make us over to suit their pleasure. This political action group has its own local political support organizations, its own pressure groups, its own vested interests, its foothold within our government, and its own propaganda apparatus." Bloodline President John F. Kennedy was well aware of America's secret society control. His many rebellious decisions against the elite, his non-participation in the great work, would ultimately lead to his assassination. He did, however, try to warn the average American of our plight. On April 27, 1961, in an address to newspaper publishers, JFK said, "The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are as a people, inherently and historically, opposed to secret societies, secret oaths, and secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence. It depends on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned. No secret is revealed. I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. The high office of President has been used to foment a plot to destroy the American's freedom, and before I leave office, I must inform the citizen of his plight.
Freemasonry is a secret fraternal order that has existed for hundreds, arguably thousands of years, and is now operating in most every country in the world. Masonry promotes itself as a philanthropic club for men of morals, and they perpetuate this image through members of the first 3 blue degrees. 97% of all Masons fall into this category, and they are often upstanding citizens, pillars of the community who truly are charitable and benevolent. However, the higher degrees, the inner circle of world Freemasonry, use the society's worldwide influence to advance their control. Acharya S. wrote, "Although the Brotherhood of Masonry appears to be relatively new, it is in reality the oldest continuous network on the planet, dating back many thousands of years, beginning when stones were first dressed. Masonry today has a generally sinister reputation because the people suspect that this powerful brotherhood has been manipulating and exploiting them. However, the average Mason has never been in the know and is therefore merely a member of a social club. Nevertheless, the higher-ups have indeed had their hand in creation on this planet on a large scale for a long time. The Masons are there, perpetually hidden behind the scenes, leaving clues to their existence as a brotherhood, some of which are evident yet still not seen. For example, the biblical Nimrod, the king who built the Tower of Babel, is considered the first Mason." Jim Marrs wrote, "The ongoing connective tissue between the modern and ancient secret societies has been Freemasonry, which existed as a formidable force long before certain lodges became Illuminized. During the late Middle Ages, when any opposition to the Holy Roman Universal Catholic Church was forced deep underground, among the only organized groups able to move freely throughout Europe were the guilds of stonemasons, who maintained meeting halls, or lodges, in every major city. The Masons, who traced their own secret knowledge of architecture and building back to Egypt and beyond, were essential in the construction of Europe's churches and cathedrals. They were the direct descendants of early guilds of Masons which existed both in Egypt and Greece, and utilized esoteric construction techniques in their craft. These techniques had been passed down through the sects and mystery schools, and some continue to confound modern builders. Freemasonry evolved over the last 1,000 years from the Knights Templar, and before that traces its roots to ancient Egypt, the Egyptian mystery religion, and esoteric schools. Some believe the original Masons were the builders of the pyramids, or that they hold the secrets of those early master Masons. Freemasonry is not, however, merely a builders' and stoneworkers' guild. Right from the first degree, initiates take blood oaths, perform occult rituals, and begin learning about a number of arcane subjects, delving deeper as they rise in degrees. Some of the subjects studied and practiced include astrology, consciousness, magic, tarot, Kabbalah, the Tree of Life, sacred geometry, divination, scrying, theosophy, numerology, symbology, alchemy, hermeticism, the chakra system, auras, energy bodies, astral projection, out-of-body experiences, kundalini, geomancy, Masonic occult history and philosophy, metaphysics, epistemology, secret handshakes, and secret gestures. Masons rise in degrees through a process of rituals and initiations. They read books like Machiavelli's The Prince and Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma, then write essays detailing whether they agree philosophically with people like Pike, Hegel, Machiavelli, and others. These essays are then sent to the headquarters of International Freemasonry and reviewed by top-level Masons. If the initiate agrees that the few should control the many, and that secret society rule is virtuous, etc., then he is congratulated and promoted through higher degrees. If the initiate disagrees that the few should control the many, and holds a genuinely moral position, then he is congratulated and promoted within his existing branch, never to rise above the blue degrees. Every Mason will disagree with this, however, because most Blue Lodge Masons genuinely do not know, and high-ranking Masons are sworn to secrecy. Commander of the Supreme Council of the 33rd Degree and Supreme Pontiff of Universal Freemasonry, Albert Pike, wrote in his Morals and Dogma, "The blue degrees are but the outer court or portico of the temple. Parts of the symbols are displayed there to the initiate, but he is intentionally misled by false interpretations. It is not intended that he shall understand them, but it is intended that he shall imagine that he understands them. Their true implication is reserved for the adepts, the princes of Masonry." 33rd degree Masonic historian Manly P. Hall wrote, "Freemasonry is a fraternity within a fraternity, an outer organization concealing an inner brotherhood of the elect. It is necessary to establish the existence of these two separate yet interdependent orders, the one visible and the other invisible. The visible society is a splendid camaraderie of free and accepted men enjoined to devote themselves to ethical, educational, fraternal, patriotic, and humanitarian concerns. The invisible society is a secret and most august fraternity whose members are dedicated to the service of a mysterious arcanum arcandrum, a sacred secret. Those brethren who have essayed to write the history of their craft have not included in their disquisitions, a formal discourse or treatise, the story of that truly secret inner society, which is to the body Freemasonic what the heart is to the body human. In each generation only a few are accepted into the inner sanctuary of the work. The great initiate philosophers of Freemasonry are masters of that secret doctrine which forms the invisible foundation of every great theological and rational institution. The process from a 1st to 33rd degree Freemason may take 10, 20, 30, or more years, but is not based on time. The way initiates rise degrees is through invitation by members of a higher degree. This is the nature of all secret societies. The only way to get ahead is by appeasing those ahead of you. It is through this bootlicking pyramid structure that the few bloodline elite at the top control the many at the bottom. Then, by issuing lords, knights, and vassals of various degrees along the way to do their bidding, the royals essentially control all facets of this worldwide brotherhood. Manly P. Hall wrote, "The initiated brother realizes that his so-called symbols and rituals are merely blinds fabricated by the wise to perpetuate ideas incomprehensible to the average individual. He also realizes that few Masons of today know or appreciate the mystic meaning concealed within these rituals." Jim Marrs wrote, "The invitation-only 33rd degree is the highest publicly known degree. The vast majority of members look upon their affiliation with Freemasonry as little different from joining the Lions Club, the Optimists, or the Chamber of Commerce. And from their standpoint, this is true. Even Masonic literature makes clear that only those initiates who progress beyond 33rd degree status are educated in the group's true goals and secrets. This hierarchy is readily admitted by Masonic authors. There has always existed an external, elementary, popular doctrine which has served for the institution of the masses who are insufficiently prepared for deeper teaching," wrote Mason Wilmshurst. "There has been an interior, advanced doctrine, a more secret knowledge, which has been reserved for riper minds, and into which only proficient and properly prepared candidates who voluntarily sought to participate in it were initiated." The highest known formal degree of Masonry is the 33rd degree. This title has been held by many world leaders and important names in modern history. The following U.S. presidents were known to be Masons, many of them 33rd degree: Washington, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Jackson, Polk, Buchanan, Johnson, Garfield, McKinley, Roosevelt, Taft, Harding, Roosevelt, Truman, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Clinton, both Bushes, and Obama. All the following people were also Masons, most of them 33rd degree. Buzz Aldrin, John Glenn, Yasser Arafat, Tony Blair, John Wilkes Booth, James Cameron, Winston Churchill, Walt Disney, Bob Dole, Frederick Engel, Newt Gingrich, Mikhail Gorbachev, Al Gore, Billy Graham, Richard Holbrooke, J. Edgar Hoover, Colonel Mandell House, Saddam Hussein, Burl Ives, Jesse James, Jesse Jackson, Henry Kissinger, Vladimir Lenin, Robert McNamara, Karl Marx, Lord Alfred Milner, Benjamin Netanyahu, Albert Pike, Prince Philip, Colin Powell, Cecil Rhodes, James Rothschild, Charles Taze Russell, Joseph Stalin, Strom Thurmond, Leon Trotsky, Paul Warburg, H.G. Wells, and thousands more. Tex Mars wrote, "When we examine the historical record of the world's most despicable mass murderers and revolutionaries, we find that almost all of them were members of Freemasonry and other secret societies of the Illuminati. Robespierre was a Freemason, Weishaupt was a Freemason, Napoleon was a Freemason, Lenin was a Freemason, Stalin was a Freemason, Truman and Roosevelt were Freemasons, Ariel Sharon is a Freemason, Bill Clinton is a Freemason, Fidel Castro is a Freemason." Traditional history insists that the Revolutionary War was fought over the British monarchy's unjust taxation of America. While this is true on one level, it is also true that the leaders of the American Revolution, the signers of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, were all descendants of British aristocratic bloodlines, and most of them Freemasons. Manly P. Hall wrote, "Not only were many of the founders of the United States government Masons, but they received aid from a secret and august body existing in Europe which helped them to establish this country for a peculiar and particular purpose known only to the initiated few." David Oveson wrote, "The very struggle for independence seems to have been directed by the Masonic Brotherhood, and some historians insist had even been started by them." Graham Hancock wrote, "Freemasonry was the driving force behind the ideals and tenets of the American Revolution. What is less well known is the fact that there was a very close connection between the French and American Masonic lodges at that time. In those days, Freemasonry in America was regulated by United Grand Lodge in England, which appointed provincial Grand Masters in various regions of the North American continent. Before the Revolutionary War, the New World of the Americas lacked unity and autonomous identity. For almost 300 years, there was no military, constitution, or federal government. Then, within 2 short years, the snap of a historical finger, America had Continental Marines, Continental Congress, and the Articles of the Confederation. With the Declaration of Independence, the British colonialists, or Americans, officially separated from the British nationalists. Freemason and bloodline General George Washington became first President of the now United States of America, and royal rule of America switched from overt to covert. Royal and secret society rule had not changed, only the perception of governance changed, while the same DNA stayed in office. Instead of peasants well aware of their plight, knowing the monarchs and emperors oppressing them, we became peasants who actually believed we were born into a free and open system. Jim Marrs wrote, "Freemasonry, the oldest and most powerful secret society in the history of the world, had planted firm roots in early-day America and even played a significant role in the American Revolution. It played an even greater role in the subsequent French Revolution, which initially was greeted with great joy and approval in the United States. The number of Masonic lodges grew and membership increased. By 1826, it was estimated that Masons in the United States numbered nearly 50,000, mostly educated and professional men. But in that year, one Mason broke ranks. It became known that a Captain William Morgan of Batavia, New York, was planning to publish a book revealing the secret symbols, handshakes, oaths, and purposes of the Freemasons. Morgan, a 30-year member of the order, wrote, The bane of our civil institutions is to be found in Masonry, already powerful and daily becoming more so. I owe my country an exposure of its dangers. Before the book could be printed, Morgan and his publisher were kidnapped in Batavia. Irate friends and neighbors pursued the kidnappers and managed to rescue the publisher, but Morgan was not so fortunate. He was never seen again. Years later, a Mason named Henry L. Valence confided to his doctor as he lay dying that he and 2 other Masons had dropped Morgan into the Niagara River. Valence said since that night he had suffered from a guilty conscience, the mark of Cain, and sought absolution for his sin. If you listen to Hollywood's Masonic adventure movie National Treasure, then 6 of the founding fathers were Freemasons. If you read various Masonic websites, they tend to admit 9 to 13 were Masons, but the truth is that the majority of the founding fathers were high-ranking Masons. David Icke wrote, "Of the 56 signatories of the American Declaration of Independence, at least 50 were known to be Freemasons, and only 1 known not to be." Ralph Epperson wrote, "The Supreme Council of the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry has told the student that 13 of 39 original signers of the Constitution were Masons. It is also interesting to note that there were 39 signers, exactly 3 times the Masonic number 13. 13 is an important number to the Masons. There are 13 degrees in York Rite Freemasonry, and there just happen to be 13 original colonies, including New York. New York is known as the Empire State, with the Empire State Building. But whose empire? Who's the emperor? Perhaps the York Rite Freemasons could tell us. 13 Masons signed the Constitution, along with 26, 13 times 2, non-Masons, making the 39, 13 times 3. There also just happens to be 39 members of the Rockefellers' Bilderberg Inner Circle, and 39 floors in Rockefeller's United Nations building. The majority of the U.S. founding fathers, the Senate, and the presidents have been Freemasons, but those who were not usually had nothing good to say about the organization. President John Quincy Adams wrote, "I do consciously and sincerely believe that the order of Freemasonry, if not the greatest, is one of the greatest moral and political evils under which the Union is now laboring, a conspiracy of the few against the equal rights of the many. Masonry ought forever to be abolished. It is wrong, essentially wrong, a seed of evil, which can never produce any good." President Millard Fillmore wrote, "The Masonic fraternity tramples upon our rights, defeats the administration of justice, and bids defiance to every government which it cannot control." President Ulysses S. Grant said, "All secret oath-bound political parties are dangerous to any nation, no matter how pure or how patriotic the motives and principles which first bring them together." Supreme Court Chief Justice John Marshall said, "The institution of Masonry ought to be abandoned as one capable of much evil, and incapable of producing any good which might not be effected by safe and open means." And Reverend John G. Stevens wrote, "Masonry was a state within a state, and that one day Masons would overthrow the democratic government of the United States and would crown one of their grand kings as ruler of this nation."
Like the Freemasons, the Illuminati, their concepts and esoteric knowledge, traces back thousands of years to the Egyptian mystery schools and religion. However, this order was first publicly identified in 1776, the same year America signed the Declaration of Independence. On May 1st, 1776, May Day, Adam Weishaupt, professor of law at Ingolstadt University, officially formed the Bavarian Illuminati. Fritz Springmeier wrote, "The Illuminati is the continuation of the mystery religions of Babylon and Egypt, and the bloodlines of the Illuminati go back to people who at one time lived in Babylon and Egypt." David Icke wrote, "The bloodlines and the Illuminati secret society network through which they manipulate has been the force behind many of the major empires of history. In ancient times, Sumer and Babylon were both headquarters for the Illuminati, in the land now called Iraq, and Egypt was also extremely important to them. It was the accounts, texts, and artifacts from Sumer and Babylon that were burned or looted from Iraqi museums in the wake of the American and British invasion. After Babylon, the Illuminati bloodline network moved its headquarters to Rome, and it was during this time that we had the Roman Empire, and the creation of the Roman Church, or institutionalized Christianity. The Roman Catholic Church structure, controlled by the Jesuit secret society, remains at the heart of Illuminati operations. The operational headquarters moved into Northern Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire, and for a period it was based in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. This was when the Dutch began to build their empire through the Dutch East India Company, and they settled South Africa. In 1688, William of Orange, one of the bloodlines, invaded England from the Netherlands and took the throne as William III in 1689. William ruled jointly with Queen Mary and then by himself after her death in 1691. In that year, William signed the charter that created the Bank of England, and the global banking system began to emerge. Banking and manufactured debt has always been one of the main vehicles used by the bloodlines to control humanity. From this time, the bloodlines and their Illuminati secret society network moved their center of operation to London, and what followed, of course, was the great and enormous British Empire. This was not the empire of the British, in truth, but that of the Illuminati bloodlines based in Britain. This expansion of the British and other European empires to all parts of the world exported the bloodlines to every continent, including, most importantly today, North America. Adam Weishaupt's Illuminati was designed to be an organization so elusive, so secretive, as to hide its membership within other secret societies. Weishaupt wrote in his journal that Freemasonry was in fact the organization most fit for infiltration by the Illuminati. Adam Weishaupt wrote, "The great strength of our order lies in its concealment. Let it never appear in any place in its own name, but always covered by another name and another occupation. None is fitter than the 3 lower degrees of Freemasonry. The public is accustomed to it, expects little from it, and therefore takes little notice of it. Next to this, the form of a learned or literary society is best suited to our purpose, and had Freemasonry not existed, this cover would have been employed. And it may be much more than a cover. It may be a powerful engine in our hands. By establishing reading societies and subscription libraries, and taking these under our direction, and supplying them through our labors, we may turn the public mind which way we will. In like manner, we must try to obtain an influence in the military academies. This may be of mighty consequence. The printing houses, booksellers' shops, chapters, and in short, all offices which have any effect, either in forming or in managing, or even in directing the mind of man. Painting and engraving are highly worthy of our care." Weishaupt himself showed little respect for the Brotherhood of Freemasonry, and mocked its structure in his journals. He knew, just as the bloodlines atop the worldwide secret society pyramid know, that the whole hierarchical structure of passing formal degrees is an unnecessary process. If the point is to learn occult subjects and become illumined, then there is no need for degrees, no need to slowly reveal secrets, no need for the rituals, rewards, and regalia. Adam Weishaupt wrote, "Of all the means I know to lead men, the most effectual is a concealed mystery. The hankering of the mind is irresistible, and if once a man has taken into his head that there is a mystery in a thing, it is impossible to get it out, either by argument or experience. And then, we can so change notions by merely changing a word. What more contemptible than fanaticism, but call it enthusiasm. Then add the little word noble, and you may lead him over the world. For their sakes, and to rivet still faster their own fetters, they engage in the most corrupting of all employments. And for what? To learn something more of an order, of which every degree explodes the doctrine of a former one? Would it have hurt the young Illuminatus to have it explained to him all at once? Would not this fire his mind, when he sees with the same glance the great object, and the fitness of the means for attaining it? Would not the exalted characters of the superior, so much excelling himself in talents and virtue and happiness, otherwise the order is good for nothing, warm his heart, and fill him with emulation, since he sees in them that what is so strongly preached to him is an attainable thing? No, no, it is all a trick. He must be kept like a child, amused with rattles and stars and ribbons, and all the satisfaction he obtains is, like the Masons, the fun of seeing others running the same gauntlet. John Robison was a Mason invited to join the Illuminati in the late 18th century. After investigating the order, Robison declined the invitation and published a book which offered his conclusions instead, called Proofs of a Conspiracy Against All the Religions and Governments of Europe, carried on in the secret meetings of Freemasons, Illuminati, and reading societies. John Robison wrote, "In short, I have found that the covert of a Mason lodge had been employed in every country for venting and propagating sentiments in religion and politics that could not have circulated in public without exposing the author to great danger. I found that this impunity had gradually encouraged men of licentious principles to become more bold, and to teach doctrines subversive of all our notions of morality, of all our confidence in the moral government of the universe, of all our hopes of improvement in a future state of existence, and of all satisfaction and contentment with our present life, so long as we live in a state of civil subordination. I have been able to trace these attempts made through a course of 50 years. I have observed these doctrines gradually diffusing and mixing with all the different systems of Freemasonry, till, at last, an association has been formed for the express purpose of rooting out all the religious establishments and overturning all the existing governments of Europe. I have seen this association exerting itself zealously and systematically, till it has become almost irresistible. And I have seen that the most active leaders in the French Revolution were members of this association, and conducted their first movements according to its principles, and by means of its instructions and assistance, formerly requested and obtained. And lastly, I have seen that this association still exists, still works in secret. The association of which I have been speaking is the Order of Illuminati, abolished in 1786 by the Elector of Bavaria, but revived immediately after, under another name, and in a different form, all over Germany. It was again detected and seemingly broken up, but it had by this time taken so deep root that it still subsists without being detected, and has spread into all the countries of Europe. George Washington himself said, "It was not my intention to doubt that the doctrines of the Illuminati had not spread in the United States. On the contrary, no one is more fully satisfied of this fact than I am." As Robison alluded, the Illuminati was abolished in 1786, but was then revived immediately after under different names. It became increasingly obvious to the good guys of European Freemasonry that even more drastic measures would have to be taken against the Illuminati. In 1794, the Duke of Brunswick, the Grand Master of German Freemasonry, wrote a letter to his brethren recommending the dissolution of the entire organization, due to the fact that it had been infiltrated and was being manipulated by unseen hands. The Duke of Brunswick wrote, "I have been convinced that we, as an order, have come under the power of some very evil occult order, profoundly versed in science, both occult and otherwise, though not infallible, their methods being black magic, that is to say, electromagnetic power, hypnotism, and powerful suggestion. We are convinced that the order is being controlled by some sun order, after the nature of the Illuminati, if not by that order itself. We see our edifice crumbling and covering the ground with ruins. We see the destruction that our hands no longer arrest. A great sect arose, which, taking for its motto the good and the happiness of man, worked in the darkness of the conspiracy to make the happiness of humanity a prey for itself. This sect is known to everyone. Its brothers are known no less than its name. It is they who have undermined the foundations of the order to the point of complete overthrow. It is by them that all humanity has been poisoned and led astray for several generations. They began by casting odium on religion, Their masters had nothing less in view than the thrones of the earth, and the governments of the nations was to be directed by their nocturnal clubs. The misuse of our order has produced all the political and moral troubles with which the world is filled today. We must, from this moment, dissolve the whole order. The Illuminati, just 18 years after its official formation, was so powerful and influential that its infiltration into Masonry caused the Duke of Brunswick to try and, quote, dissolve the whole order. Neither Freemasonry nor the Illuminati were dissolved, however, and their power and influence has only increased in the centuries since. Ralph Epperson wrote, and in 1812, the president at Harvard University, Joseph Willard, retired to preach in Vermont. He took the occasion of his retirement on July 4, 1812, to express his concern over the consequences of the then looming war. He said, quote, there is sufficient evidence that a number of societies of the Illuminati have been established in this land. They are doubtless striving to secretly undermine all our ancient institutions, civil and sacred. These societies are clearly leagued with those of the same order in Europe. We live in an alarming period. The enemies of all order are seeking our ruin. Should infidelity generally prevail, our independence would fall, of course. Our republican government would be annihilated. Nessa Webster wrote, the art of Illuminism lay in enlisting dupes as well as adepts, and by encouraging dreams of honest visionaries, or the schemes of fanatics. By flattering the vanity of ambitious egotists, by working on unbalanced brains, or by playing such passions as greed and power to make men of totally divergent aims serve the secret purpose of the sect. People with money were welcomed, but kept oblivious of actual secrets. The purpose is to win power and riches, to undermine secular or religious government, and attain the masters of the world.
When a country centralizes banking, it concentrates an enormous amount of wealth into a single institution, works mainly to make the rich richer, and opens the government to control from foreign interests. As Bill Clinton's mentor, Dr. Carroll Quigley, wrote, the powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreements arrived at in frequent private meetings and conferences. The apex of the system was the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, a private bank owned and controlled by the world's central banks, which were themselves private corporations. The growth of financial capitalism made possible a centralization of world economic control and use of this power for the direct benefit of financiers and the indirect injury of all other economic groups. As Jim Marrs said, anyone seeking to prove the existence of conspiracies in America needs look no further than the origin of our present central bank. Here is a well-documented conspiracy involving the very names tied to modern secret societies. Jordan Maxwell said, somebody is using us. The business of banking was set up in the year 1099. An income tax form is a 1099. Who decided on that? Think about it. With institutions like IMF and World Bank, along with new union currencies like the EU euro, further consolidating and centralizing the world's banking and currencies, the amount of worldwide influence these international bankers have on world economies and politics is extraordinary. Their method of control is just like a loan shark or the mafia. Firstly, to qualify for loans, desperate nations are forced into pawning mines, railways, forests, power, or water companies. Then to pay off the loans, nations are forced to do things like ignore environmental laws, lower wages, cut back on education or health care, and privatize or sell off their resources to crooked corporations like Enron and Exxon. Whenever these poor countries cannot pay off the loans, the generous international banksters simply give new higher interest loans to pay off the old ones,
further indebting and enslaving the nation. As Mayor Amschel Rothschild said, "Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws." More recently, Richard McKenna, former president of Midlands Bank of England, said, "Those that create and issue the money and credit direct the policies of government and hold in their hands the destiny of the people." Alex Christopher wrote, "It is a well-known fact that international bankers have financed nations to fight against each other. Where do you think the countries get their money to buy tanks, guns, uniforms, etc., to arm their nation for war? They borrow from international bankers. International bankers have financed both sides of countries at war with each other. They don't care who wins, because while the nations are borrowing huge amounts of money to kill each other, international bankers make huge amounts on money from the interest charges that they make each nation pay. They also have the power to control the outcome of the war by simply cutting off the flow of money they lend. So under the threat of war, international bankers have used their power to gain or increase control over governments. By keeping a nation in debt, they are in a position to demand a voice in the government affairs of the nation. Another goal, which they have already achieved, is to control all the world's monetary systems. Thomas Jefferson said, "I sincerely believe that banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies. If the American people ever allow the private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and the corporations that grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered." Despite Jefferson's warnings, in 1791, Alexander Hamilton, the Secretary of the Treasury, pushed a congressional charter through to create the first Bank of the United States, which stood for 20 years, until 1811, when President James Madison and Vice President George Clinton refused to sign and renew the charter. Madison said, "History records that the money changers have used every form of abuse, intrigue, deceit, and violent means possible to maintain their control over governments by controlling the money and its issuance." Strangely enough, only 5 years later, still under Madison's presidency, in 1816, he signed the charter for the Second National Bank. Such hypocritical action raised suspicion of bribe or blackmail at work behind the scenes. In 1828, Andrew Jackson said in a speech addressing the central bankers, "You are a den of vipers and thieves. I intend to rout you out, and by the eternal God, I will rout you out. If people only understood the rank injustice of the money and banking system, there would be a revolution by morning." As president for the next 8 years, Jackson worked to abolish the federal charter of the Second Bank of the U.S. In 1835, an attempt was made on his life. The would-be assassin, Richard Lawrence, pointed 2 pistols at Jackson, pulled the triggers, and miraculously, both misfired. Jackson immediately proceeded to beat Lawrence with his cane. Lawrence would later tell police he wanted to kill Jackson because, quote, "money would be more plenty" for him, and that he, quote, "could not rise until the president fell." He said the American government owed him a large sum of money, but Andrew Jackson was preventing him from receiving it. This is most definitely a reference to Andrew Jackson's struggles with the central bank, which was the obvious motivation for such an attempt on his life. In 1836, Jackson succeeded in abolishing the Second National Bank, stating, "The bold effort the present bank had made to control the government are but premonitions of the fate that await the American people should they be deluded into a perpetuation of this institution or the establishment of another like it." When asked on his deathbed what his life's greatest accomplishment was, Jackson replied, "I killed the bank." Fortunately, we were not deluded into the perpetuation of that Second National Bank, but unfortunately, we were tricked into the establishment of another, much worse than it. From 1837 to 1863 was a period of free banking in America during which only state-chartered banks existed and the values of silver and gold were very stable. In 1863, the Rothschild interests had succeeded in forcing a bill through Congress via their insider Treasury Secretary Salmon P. Chase. He passed the National Banking Act, once again creating a federally chartered central bank, one with the power to print and issue paper money. At the time, President Abraham Lincoln fought against the central bankers and said, "The money power preys upon the nation in time of peace and conspires against it in times of adversity. It is more despotic than monarchy, more insolent than autocracy, more selfish than bureaucracy. I see in the near future a crisis approaching that unnerves me and causes me to tremble for the safety of our country. Corporations have been enthroned, an era of corruption will follow, and the money power of the country will endeavor to prolong its reign by working upon the prejudices of the people until the wealth is aggregated in a few hands and the republic is destroyed." He was shot and killed a year and a half later in April 1865. From 1864 to 1913, the National Banking Act and the Civil War all but forced the majority of America's banks to become nationalized. The effort to create the third U.S. central bank began in 1873, when the Bloodline International Banking Cartel engineered the first of 3 financial panics which they used to scare the public into accepting the Federal Reserve. Eustace Mullins wrote, "A study of the panics of 1873, 1893, and 1907 indicates that these panics were the result of the international bankers' operations in London. The public was demanding in 1908 that Congress enact legislation to prevent the recurrence of artificially induced money panics. In 1881, President Garfield was assassinated less than 4 months after taking office. He was another anti-banking establishment president who took action and spoke out against them. He was coincidentally shot and killed shortly after declaring, quote, "Whosoever controls the volume of money in any country is absolute master of all industry and commerce, and when you realize that the entire system is very easily controlled, one way or another, by a few powerful men at the top, you will not have to be told how periods of inflation and depression originate." The next presidential assassination happened 20 years later, when a supposed anarchist shot William McKinley twice at point-blank range. Once again, McKinley was a strong supporter of the gold standard and helped pass the Gold Standard Act of 1900, less than a year before his death. On November 22, 1910, 7 of the richest men in the world met at J.P. Morgan's personal island retreat off the coast of Georgia called Jekyll Island. The 7 men were Frank A. Vanderlip, Abraham Piatt Andrew, Henry P. Davidson, Charles D. Norton, Benjamin Strong, Paul Moritz Warburg, and Nelson W. Aldrich. Behind these men stood the banking and investment interests of the Rockefellers, Rothschilds, Schiffs, Morgans, and Warburgs. The 7 Jekyll Island conspirators met for 7 days and planned a series of radical banking reforms necessary to create the Federal Reserve. When the media learned about Jekyll Island meetings, the bankers all claimed they were out duck hunting. Later in life, however, conspirator and president of New York National City Bank, Frank A. Vanderlip, admitted otherwise when he wrote, "There was an occasion near the close of 1910 when I was as secretive, indeed as furtive as any conspirator. I do not feel it is any exaggeration to speak of our secret expedition to Jekyll Island as the occasion of the actual conception of what eventually became the Federal Reserve System." Woodrow Wilson had said of the earlier 3 financial crises that all this trouble could be averted if we appointed a committee of 6 or 7 public-spirited men like J.P. Morgan to handle the affairs of our country. And that is exactly what happened. Ralph Epperson wrote, "So the American people who had suffered through the American Revolution, the War of 1812, the battles between Andrew Jackson and the Second Bank of the United States, the Civil War, the previous panics of 1873 and 1893, and now the panic of 1907, were finally conditioned to the point of accepting the solution offered by those who had caused all of these events, the international bankers. That solution was a central bank." Jim Marrs wrote, "These men concluded not to have one central bank in the United States, but several, and they agreed that no one was to utter the words central or bank. Most important, they decided that this creation would be made to look like an official agency of the U.S. government. They called it the Federal Reserve, but it is neither federal nor a reserve. It is about as federal as Federal Express, and as much a reserve as American Indian reservations. It is a network of banks, 5 originally, now 12, headed at the New York branch, all of them privately owned, but made to appear like an official government agency. The original stockholders of the Federal Reserve were Rockefellers, Rothschilds, Warburgs, Russells, Morgans, Peabodys, and Reynolds, all Illuminati families. Fritz Springmeier wrote, "The Federal Reserve Bank of New York was controlled by 5 banks which owned 53% of its stock. These 5 banks were controlled by Nathan M. Rothschilds and Sons of London. Control over the U.S. Fed is basically control over the world's money. That fact alone shows how immense the Rothschilds' power is. If one examines who has been appointed to head the Fed and to run it, the connections of the Federal Reserve System to the Rothschilds can further be seen. Another private enterprise using the name Federal that the Rothschilds also direct is Federal Express. Anyone else might be taken to court for making their businesses sound like they are government, not the Rothschilds. It is appropriate for them to appropriate the name of Federal because, by way of MI6 via the CIA, they instruct the U.S. government. Senators are bought and paid off by their system, as investigators of the BCCI are discovering. In 1913, in an effort to pacify dissenters, the conspirators pre-planned a fake opposition to their central bank scheme. House Banking and Currency Committee Chairman Carter Glass wrote what was promoted as an alternative solution, the Federal Reserve Act. Jim Marrs wrote, Jekyll Island planners Vanderlip and Aldrich spoke out venomously against Glass's bill, even though entire sections were identical to the Aldrich plan. It was clearly an effort to garner public support for the Glass bill by the appearance of banker opposition. The appearance of opposition by Wall Street was necessary. William McAdoo, Wilson's son-in-law, who was appointed Secretary of the Treasury, later revealed, "Bankers fought the Federal Reserve Act with the tireless energy of men fighting a forest fire. They said it was populistic, socialistic, half-baked, destructive, infantile, badly conceived, and unworkable." However, McAdoo said in interviews with these bankers, "I perceived gradually, through all the haze and smoke of controversy, that the banking world was not really as much opposed to the bill as it pretended to be." Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act on December 23, 1913, just 2 days before Christmas, with some congressmen already home for the holidays, and with the average citizen's attention clearly elsewhere. In 1913, Congressman Lindbergh warned that the Federal Reserve System establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the President signs this act, the invisible government by the monetary power will be legitimized. The new law will create inflation whenever the trusts want inflation. From now on, depressions will be scientifically created. After the bankers finished profiting from the World War, they decided to cause an economic depression in the U.S. so that they could further buy up the market, further expand government, and further control the American people. Creating booms, busts, recessions, and depressions is completely scientific when you decide the amount of money printed and circulated. As Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman said, "The Federal Reserve definitely caused the Great Depression by contracting the amount of currency in circulation by 1/3 from 1929 to 1933. Gary Allen wrote, "To think that the crash of 1929 was an accident or the result of stupidity defies all logic. The international bankers who promoted the inflationary policies and pushed the propaganda which pumped up the stock market represented too many generations of accumulated expertise to have blundered it into the Great Depression. It was the game of boom and bust, using economic crisis to consolidate political power at the top where it can be most easily controlled. The major cause of the economic collapse was the deliberately created credit inflation by the Federal Reserve. In 6 years, it had inflated the money supply by 62%, inducing market speculations and unwise investments by middle Americans who were being set up for a shearing. When the shearing came, The sheep took a realistic look at their economy and panicked. Optimism was replaced by economic despair. Despair produced a willingness to accept a major expansion of government controls over the economy. During the Depression, Congressman Louis T. McFadden was a very outspoken voice against the Federal Reserve. Regarding the Great Depression, he said, "It was not accidental. It was a carefully contrived occurrence. The international bankers sought to bring about a condition of despair here so that they might emerge as rulers of us all." In 1932, he said, "We have in this country one of the most corrupt institutions the world has ever known. I refer to the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks. The Federal Reserve Board has cheated the people of the United States out of enough money to pay the national debt 3 times over. This evil institution has impoverished and ruined the people of the United States, has bankrupted itself, and has practically bankrupted our government. It has done this through the defects of the law under which it operates, through the maladministration of the law by the Federal Reserve Board, and through the corrupt practices of the moneyed vultures who control it." Proceeding McFadden's activism, he received a series of death threats, and then died of food poisoning shortly after, under suspicious circumstances. President Franklin D. Roosevelt said in 1933, "The real truth of the matter is that a financial element in the large centers has owned the government since the days of Andrew Jackson." Ralph Epperson wrote, "Once inflation or deflation has been documented, the government economists point with pride at the supposed perpetrators, the public. They never direct their attention at the real culprit in America, the privately owned Federal Reserve System. This private banking establishment has complete control over the quantity of money in circulation. Therefore, they have the ability to create inflation or deflation whenever they choose to do so. Since the Great Depression, the Federal Reserve bankers have continued to manipulate the market for their own gain, and done so through periodic planned market plunges, after which they buy up all they can. In 1936 and 37, stock prices plummeted 50%. In 1948, dropped 16%. In 1953, down 13%. 1956 and 57, down 13%. And late in 57, down another 19%. It has continued like this every few years until today. In 1963, President Kennedy passed Executive Order 11110, which stripped the Federal Reserve from its power to loan money to the U.S. government. It also called for the printing of $450 billion in U.S.-backed debt-free currency, and gave the Treasury Department the authority to issue silver certificates against the Treasury's silver holdings. 6 months after this, JFK was killed. As soon as his successor Lyndon Johnson took office, the first thing he did was suspend the printing of JFK's silver certificates, and took them out of circulation. Ron Paul said, "It's money out of thin air. It's the secrecy of it all that's so bad. The ownership is by members of all the banks. It is something Congress created. The first central and national bank was created by Alexander Hamilton, and Jefferson got rid of it. The second one was gotten rid of by Andrew Jackson, and I'm just looking forward to being the president that gets rid of the third national bank." And Jordan Maxwell wrote, "Do you remember the television show called Mission Impossible? If you ever see a rerun, watch the opening of the show very closely. What will come up on the screen will be the insignia IMF, supposedly standing for the Impossible Mission Force. The Impossible Mission Force, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, what were they always doing on the show? They were always tricking leaders out of positions of authority, assassinating somebody, helping people escape, or doing some other dirty deal, all in a war for power. Whose power? Of course, they were always working for some government, but the agents are not supposed to know who that is for sure. They just do their jobs, not knowing who's really hired them. The IMF just sends them out on a mission that they must perform at all costs. And if anyone should find out who's really pulling the strings, then the agents are told that we are going to disavow any connection to you. Well, that is the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which is the power behind the Federal Reserve System, which is raping our country and destroying our economy. And these guys are doing it right in front of you, telling you what they are doing. But we just don't see it. even after they spell it out for us on television. They are even making comedies about it, like Get Smart. On one side you have chaos, and on the other you have control. And when you watch the show closely and ignore the foolishness, it is easy to see that the same operation is running both sides, creating chaos, then rushing in to control it, in order to accomplish an agenda. That is how it has always been. Get smart. They are telling you something.
The Skull and Bones Secret Society was officially founded at Yale University in 1832, but finds its roots in Freemasonry and takes its symbology from the Pirates and Brotherhood of Death. Like the Masons, Bonesmen choose their own initiates, and the only way to enter the Brotherhood is to be tapped by an existing member. Only 15 members are accepted each year, which is absolutely amazing considering the number of important historical figures who just happen to be Skull and Bonesmen. For instance, U.S. Presidents William H. Taft, George Herbert Walker Bush, and George Walker Bush were all three members of Skull and Bones. The following U.S. Senators, Prescott Bush, John Kerry, David Boren, Jonathan Bingham, John Chafee, John Sherman Cooper, James Buckley, Chauncey Depew, Frank Bosworth Brandegee, Robert A. Taft, William Maxwell Evarts, and John Hines were all Skull and Bonesmen. Governors Averell Harriman, William Bissell, William Henry Gleason, Simeon Eben Baldwin, and David Boren were Bonesmen, and so were Congressmen Frank Bosworth Brandegee, Howard M. Baldrige, and Jonathan Brewster Bingham. Supreme Court Justices Morrison Waite, Potter Stewart, William Taft, Simeon Eben Baldwin, and Edward Baldwin Whitney were all Bones brothers. Also Pierre Jay, the first chairman of the New York Federal Reserve, and George L. Harrison, president of the New York Federal Reserve, were both Bonesmen. Fritz Springmeier wrote, "Investigations revealed that the main purpose of the Skull and Bones is to get as many members as possible into strategically placed positions of power." Robbins stated that President Bush has tapped 5 Bonesmen to join his administration. One of them is current Securities and Exchange Commissioner William Donaldson, class of 1953. Donaldson will answer no questions about the Bones. Right down the line, almost every Bonesman has proven unbelievably successful in his chosen profession. William Maxwell Evarts, class of 1837, became U.S. Secretary of State, Attorney General, and a senator. Russell Davenport, class of 1923, was editor of Fortune magazine and created the Fortune 500 list. Amory Ho Bradford, class of 1934, married Carol Warburg Rothschild and was general manager for the New York Times. Richard Gow, class of 1955, was president of George Bush's Zapata Oil Company. Winston Lord, class of 1959, was chairman of the CFR, ambassador to China, and Clinton's Assistant Secretary of State. Founder of the National Review and host of TV show Firing Line, William F. Buckley was a Bonesman, and so was Henry Luce, the founder of Time Magazine, Life, Fortune, House and Home, and Sports Illustrated. Percy Rockefeller was a prominent businessman, founder and vice president of O&Oak Corporation, and sat on the board of directors for over a dozen large corporations. Alphonso Taft was a U.S. Attorney General, Secretary of War, and ambassador to Russia and Austria. His son William Taft was President of the United States and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. As Ron Rosenbaum said in a CBS interview, "I think Skull and Bones has had slightly more success than the Mafia in the sense that the leaders of the 5 families are all doing 100 years in jail, and the leaders of the Skull and Bones families are doing 4 and 8 years in the White House." Many Bonesmen have graduated with CIA and intelligence community jobs waiting for them too. F. Truby Davison, Howard Weaver, William Sloane Coffin Jr., V. Van Dyne, James Buckley, Bill Buckley, Hugh Cunningham, Hugh Wilson, Reuben Holden, Charles R. Walker, Robert D. French, Archibald MacLeish, Dino Pianzio, William and McGeorge Bundy, Richard Moore, and George Bush are all bonesmen with U.S. intelligence agency jobs. As Yale professor of history Gaddis Smith said, Yale has influenced the Central Intelligence Agency more than any other university, giving the CIA the atmosphere of a class reunion. The Skull and Bones building at the Yale campus is called the Tomb. The imagery and decor inside the tomb is of death and darkness. Crypts, tombs, skulls, bones, blood, knives, swords, armor, etc. Inside the tomb, the Skull and Bones brothers annually perform their infamous, strange, and sexually promiscuous initiations. Ear-piercing screams are often heard from outside, and many say the tomb radiates negativity that they feel physically. In April 2001, ABC News and the New York Observer filmed bonesmen enacting mock throat-cutting rituals. In the most rumored ritual, it is said each new initiate must lay down naked, blindfolded in a casket, and masturbate while other brothers stand in a circle watching. One particularly notable bonesman was George Bush Sr.'s grandfather, the banker and businessman George Herbert Walker, who was director of W.A. Harriman and Company, Harriman 15, American International Corporation, Georgian Manganese Corporation, Barnsdall Corporation, American Ship and Commerce Corporation, Union Banking Corporation, G.H. Walker and Company, Missouri Pacific Railroad, New Orleans, Texas, and Mexican railroads. He was also a golf enthusiast and president of the USGA United States Golf Association. The biennial Walker Cup is named after him. He had 3 sons who all graduated Yale and became Skull and Bonesmen as well. George Herbert Walker Jr., co-founder of the New York Mets. Dr. John M. Walker became a CEO, and Lewis Walker, a CIA agent. His daughter, Dorothy, married bonesman Prescott Bush, who would become a U.S. Senator, CBS Board of Directors, vice president of his father-in-law's business Harriman and Company, and father of George Bush. Skull and Bones members often pose on both sides of the political dichotomy. For instance, The Nation magazine and New Republic on the left were financed by Willard Straight, using Payne Whitney, Skull and Bones funds, while The National Review, on the right, was published by William F. Buckley, another bonesman. In 2004, Republican George W. Bush ran neck and neck against Democrat John Kerry, his Skull and Bones fraternity brother, and 16th cousin. As Dan Thompson wrote, both President Bush and John Kerry have appeared on national television with political pundit Tim Russert of Meet the Press. Both of them refused to answer any questions about their lifelong membership to the Skull and Bones fraternity. Their method of manipulation uses the bipartisan system as a control mechanism. By having members on both the political left and right, they create the boundaries, divide the issues, and control the playing field. You do the math. What are the odds that the top 2 candidates for the presidency of a 300+ million person nation would be 16th cousins and members of the same organization reputed by many to be the most powerful secret society in America? In MSNBC interviews, when asked pointed questions about the implications of their membership in Skull and Bones, both Bush and Kerry laughed and changed the subject, refusing to answer. As U.S. Naval Intelligence Lieutenant Commander Al Martin said, "You have to look at the entire Bush family in this context, as if the entire family ran a corporation called Frauds R Us. Each member of the family, George Sr., George Jr., Neil, Jeb, Prescott, Wally, etc., have their own specialty of fraud. George Jr.'s specialty was insurance and security fraud. Jeb's specialty was oil and gas fraud. Neil's specialty was real estate fraud. Prescott's specialty was banking fraud. Wally's specialty was securities fraud. And George Sr.'s specialty? All of the above. Prescott Bush, Jonathan Bush, George Herbert Walker, George Herbert Walker Bush, and George Walker Bush are all members of the Bush family in Skull and Bones. When George W. Bush entered office, he brought 5 Bonesmen into his administration. Major players in Skull and Bones have financed both sides of world wars and the Russian Revolution. They have controlled the left-right political paradigm and helped pave the way for a new world order. In 1992, George H.W. Bush told White House reporter Sarah McClendon, quote, "If the people were to ever find out what we, the Bushes, have done, we would be chased down the streets and lynched." When French Freemason Pierre L'Enfant designed the layout of Washington, D.C., he placed occult symbols everywhere. The most impressive of these directly relates to the Bohemian Grove Society. When seen from an aerial view, the U.S. Congress building, surrounding roads, trees, and structures, clearly formed the picture of an owl sitting atop a pyramid. The same owl appears on the National Press Club logo, the Congress building itself, and the upper right-hand corner of every U.S. dollar bill. What does this owl symbolize, and why is it hidden in our architecture and currency? David Icke wrote, "The roads within the grounds of the Congress building make the very clear symbol of an owl. You also find that the owl is sitting on a pyramid, the pyramid and all-seeing owl. The collective word for owls is a parliament of owls, which is uncannily appropriate. The same owl symbol can be found hidden on the dollar bill if you know where to look and have a very powerful magnifying glass. I also understand a new pedestrianization scheme around Nelson's Column in Trafalgar Square, London, is going to look like an owl from above. There is a sexual playground for leading American and foreign politicians, mobsters, bankers, businessmen, top entertainers, etc., who are initiates of the Babylonian Brotherhood. It is called Bohemian Grove, 75 miles north of San Francisco in California, near the hamlet of Monte Rio, alongside the Russian River in Sonoma County. I went to the area in 1997 to have a look around, and when I told the hotel receptionist where I was going, she warned me to be very careful, because some people who had been to investigate had never been seen again. Bohemian Grove is a 2,700-acre forest retreat for the elite. Every July since 1873, hundreds, now thousands of top politicians, bankers, businessmen, and media personalities gather at the Grove for 2 weeks of events, ranging from the expected, such as meetings, speeches, and lectures, to the very unexpected, like drunken mass orgies and mock human sacrifice rituals affront a 40-foot-tall statue of a Babylonian owl god. Such craziness was often discounted as hearsay by naysayers, that is, until author and filmmaker Alex Jones infiltrated the Grove in 2000 and shot clear video footage of the cremation of care ritual in his film Dark Secrets Inside Bohemian Grove. Alex Jones said, "At this point, I should digress and go back and say that as we were walking into the Grove, we actually came within about 10 yards of the 40-foot stone owl that sits to the north side of the small lake. We were only about 7 yards away from the black altar that sits at the base of the owl. So already at this point, we had proven that the rumors were true. Yes, there is a giant stone owl. Yes, there is an altar. So I was there witnessing something right out of the medieval painter Hieronymus Bosch's vision of hell. Burning metal crosses, priests in red and black robes, with the high priest in a silver robe with a red cape, a burning body screaming in pain, a giant stone great-horned owl. World leaders, bankers, media, and the head of academia engaged in these activities. It was total insanity." Besides the occult ceremonies and sexual promiscuities, policy speeches are regularly given by members and guests as well. They even boast that the Manhattan Project was conceived at Bohemian Grove. Edward Teller, the father of the H-bomb, and Glenn Seaborg, who developed plutonium, were both Grovers. Other past and regular attendees include George Bush Sr. and Jr., Bill Clinton, Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon, Jimmy Carter, Gerald Ford, Dwight Eisenhower, Lyndon Johnson, Herbert Hoover, Robert and Joseph Kennedy, David, Lawrence, and Nelson Rockefeller, Dick Cheney, Al Gore, Dan Quayle, Colin Powell, Henry Kissinger, Donald Rumsfeld, Newt Gingrich, Alan Greenspan, David Gergen, George Shultz, William Casey, William F. Buckley, Robert Novak, Ray Kroc, Prince Bandar bin Abdul Aziz, Mikhail Gorbachev, James Woolsey, Earl Warren, Walter Cronkite, William Randolph Hearst, Andrew Knight, Burt Bacharach, Bing Crosby, and Bob Hope, just to scratch the surface. Jordan Maxwell wrote, "Now I have to ask you, what are ex-presidents of the United States, such as Jimmy Carter, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Ronald Reagan, and George Bush, doing there? These are all living presidents, standing there in unison, the whole line of them, in uniforms, looking like KKK members in front of a great bonfire, worshipping an owl. The last 2 weeks of July of every year, a secret meeting is held in our country in Northern California by the world's most powerful people. Bankers, politicians, industrialists, entertainment luminaries, a huge composite of puissant world figures. This group is directly linked with the European ruling elites and is commonly known as the Bohemian Society. Our now famous Council on Foreign Relations, the government behind the American government, is represented at the Bohemian Grove, along with members of the Bilderberg Group of Europe. A meeting is held once a year there to decide on a worldwide scale a manipulative agenda concerning your future. A shining example of true democracy carried on in the dark. Obviously, here your vote doesn't count. Appropriately, the owl was chosen as a symbol for this ilk, for it too is at home in the dark. The name Bohemian carries a dictionary definition as a community of persons who adopt manners and mores conspicuously different from those expected or approved of by the majority of society, who disregard conventional standards of behavior. No wonder they want no input from you. The Round Table is a secret society that was started around the turn of the 20th century by Freemason and Rothschild agent Lord Alfred Milner, who was entrusted the mission by Cecil Rhodes. When statesman and businessman Cecil Rhodes died in 1902, he was one of the wealthiest men in the world. In his will, Rhodes devoted his entire fortune to the creation of the Round Table groups, the purpose of which would ultimately be to form a world government, or as he said in the will, to and for the establishment, promotion, and development of a secret society, the true aim and object whereof shall be for the extension of British rule throughout the world. Cecil Rhodes' strong desire for world government was epitomized in his statement, "I would annex the planets if I could." Dr. Carroll Quigley wrote, "In the middle 1890s, Rhodes had a personal income of at least £1 million sterling a year, which he spent so freely for mysterious purposes that he was usually overdrawn on his account. Cecil Rhodes' commitment to a conspiracy to establish world government was set down in a series of wills described by Frank Edelet in his book American Rhodes Scholarships. Frank Edelet wrote, quote, "In 1888, Rhodes made his third will, leaving everything to Lord Rothschild, his financier in mining enterprises, with an accompanying letter enclosing the written matter discussed between us. The model for this proposed secret society was the Society of Jesus, though he mentions also the Masons. The secret society was organized on the conspiratorial pattern of circles within circles. Professor Quigley informs us that the central part of the secret society was established by March 1891 using Rhodes's money. The organization was run for Rothschild by Lord Alfred Milner. The Round Table worked behind the scenes at the highest levels of British government, influencing foreign policy and England's involvement and conduct of World War I. Bill Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar and a student of Round Table researcher Professor Quigley at Georgetown University. In his presidential acceptance speech, he thanked Dr. Quigley and called him his mentor. Carroll Quigley was not only a long-time researcher of the Round Table, but was brought inside for a couple years as official historian. He wrote about this in his 1966 book, Tragedy and Hope. Dr. Quigley wrote, "The Rhodes Scholarships, which Clinton received, are known to everyone. What is not so widely known is that Rhodes in 5 previous wills left his fortune to form a secret society which was to devote itself to the preservation and expansion of the British Empire. And what does not seem to be known to anyone is that this secret society continues to exist to this day. There does exist, and has existed for a generation, an international Anglophile network which operates, to some extent, in the way the radical right believes the communists act. In fact, this network, which we may identify as the Round Table groups, has no aversion to cooperating with the communists or any other groups, and frequently does so. I know of the operations of this network because I have studied it for 20 years, and was permitted for 2 years, in the early 1960s, to examine its papers and secret records. I have no aversion to it, or to most of its aims, and have, for much of my life, been close to it and to many of its instruments. I have objected both in the past and recently to a few of its policies, but in general my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown, and I believe its role in history is significant enough to be known. David Icke wrote, "One of the most important secret societies within the Illuminati web is called the Round Table. It is based in Britain, with branches across the world, and it is the Round Table that orchestrates the network of the Bilderberg Group, Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, and the Royal Institute of International Affairs." Just like the ancient mystery schools, the Templars, Masons, Illuminati, or other secret societies, the Round Table groups were and are conducted in a pyramid structure, with the most knowledgeable kept at the peak, and each person down the line working on a need-to-know basis. Or as Rhodes discussed in his will, a succession of inner and outer circles. Jim Marrs wrote, "The Round Tables started out as a collection of semi-secret groups, formed along the lines of the Illuminati and Freemasonry, with inner and outer circles, and a pyramid hierarchy. The inner circle was called the Circle of Initiates, or the Elect, while the outer circle was called the Association of Helpers. 2 members of Rhodes' inner circle of initiates were British financiers Lord Victor Rothschild and Lord Milner." David Icke wrote, "These organizations, like the Round Table, are made up of inner and outer circles. The inner circle knows the agenda, and works full-time to achieve it. The next circle knows much of the agenda, and works to that end in their particular sphere of influence. The next circle is pretty much in the dark about the real agenda, but is manipulated to make the right decisions in their area of operation, without knowing the true reason for them." The first 2 groups created by the Round Table Society were the British Royal Institute for International Affairs in 1920, and the American Council on Foreign Relations in 1921. In fact, the original plans for both were drawn up during the Paris Peace Conference of 1919. Though they were given different names to mask their autonomy, the Royal Institute of International Affairs and the Council on Foreign Relations are just sub-branches of the Rhodes-Milner Round Table. Dr. Carroll Quigley wrote, "At the end of the War of 1914, it became clear that the organization of this system had to be greatly extended. The front organization, called the Royal Institute of International Affairs, had its nucleus in each area the existing submerged Round Table group. In New York, it was known as the Council on Foreign Relations, and was a front for J.P. Morgan and Company." Gary Allen wrote, "Later, the plan was changed to create an ostensible autonomy because, quote, it seemed unwise to set up a single institute with branches. It had to be made to appear that the CFR in America and the RIIA in Britain were really independent bodies, lest the American public become aware the CFR was in fact a subsidiary of the Round Table Group and react in patriotic fury. This is the group which designed the United Nations, the first major successful step on the road to a world superstate. At least 47 CFR members were among the American delegates to the founding of the United Nations in San Francisco in 1945. Today, the CFR remains active in working toward its final goal of a government over all the world, a government which the insiders and their allies will control. The goal of the CFR is simply to abolish the United States with its constitutional guarantees of liberty, and they don't even try to hide it. Study number 7 published by the CFR on November 25, 1959, openly advocates building a new international order, which must be responsive to world aspirations for peace and for social and economic change, an international order, including states labeling themselves as socialist or communist. The Council on Foreign Relations is a private group not affiliated with the U.S. government, but made to look that way. Just as the Federal Reserve, the name Council on Foreign Relations sounds official to the unsuspecting ear, and they even print a magazine called Foreign Affairs to help pacify the organization in the public mind. But the truth is, the CFR is not a council belonging to the U.S. government, and is, in fact, a secret society masquerading as an official organization. If they called it Republicrats for World Government, or Demopublican Global Governance Group, then the herd might notice. Even if they called it the American Royal Institute for International Affairs, the sheeple might raise an eyebrow. This is the same reason our American leaders are called presidents and not prime ministers, even though they are all royalty. Admiral Chester Ward was a U.S. Judge Advocate General of the Navy and CFR member for 16 years. He said the purpose of the CFR was, quote, promoting disarmament and the submergence of U.S. sovereignty and national independence into an all-powerful one-world government. In his book, Kissinger on the Couch, Ward wrote, "The lust to surrender the sovereignty and independence of the United States is pervasive throughout most of the membership, and particularly in the leadership of several divergent cliques that make up what is actually a polycentric organization." Harper's in July 1958 wrote, "The most powerful clique in these CFR groups has one objective in common. They want to bring about the surrender of the sovereignty and the national independence of the U.S. They want to end national boundaries and racial and ethnic loyalties, supposedly to increase business and ensure world peace. What they strive for would inevitably lead to dictatorship and loss of freedoms by the people." Congressman John Rarick in 1971 said, "The Council on Foreign Relations is the establishment. Not only does it have influence and power in key decision-making positions at the highest levels of government to apply pressure from above, but it also announces and uses individuals and groups to bring pressure from below, to justify the high-level decisions for converting the U.S. from a sovereign constitutional republic into a servile member state of a one-world dictatorship." CFR membership is made up of past, present, and future presidents, secretaries of state, secretaries of defense, ambassadors, senators, congressmen, judges, Federal Reserve System presidents and chairmen, bankers, military leaders, media owners and personalities, lobbyist lawyers, corporate executives, think tank executives, and university presidents. CFR membership is composed of the most influential Americans of the century. Just look at the household names belonging to the CFR. George Bush, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Jimmy Carter, Gerald Ford, Richard Nixon, John F. Kennedy, Dwight Eisenhower, Herbert Hoover, Robert Kennedy, Al Gore, Condoleezza Rice, Jesse Jackson, Colin Powell, Strobe Talbot, James Woolsey, John Dulles, Michael Dukakis, Fred Thompson, John McCain, Barack Obama, Mitt Romney, Rudy Giuliani, John Edwards, Michael Bloomberg, John Kerry, Thomas Keane, Henry Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski, Jonathan Bush, Angelina Jolie, Dan Rather, Diane Sawyer, Barbara Walters, Consuelo Mack, Warren Beatty, William Buckley Jr., Newt Gingrich, Alan Greenspan, Paul Wolfowitz, Averill and Pamela Harriman, David, Nelson, and Jay Rockefeller, William and McGeorge Bundy, Brent Scowcroft, and Paul Warburg. Here is just a sampling of the CFR's corporate members: ABC News, American Express, Bank of America, Boeing, Chevron, Citigroup, Coca-Cola, De Beers, ExxonMobil, FedEx, Ford, GE, Google, Halliburton, Heinz, IBM, Lockheed Martin, MasterCard, Merck, Merrill Lynch, Motorola, NASDAQ, News Corp, Nike, PepsiCo, Pfizer, Shell Oil, Sony, Time Warner, Toyota, Verizon, and Visa. Gary Allen wrote, "Although the membership of the CFR is a veritable who's who in big business and the media, probably only one person in 1,000 is familiar with the organization itself, and even fewer are aware of its real purposes. During its first 50 years of existence, the CFR was almost never mentioned by any of the moguls of the mass media. And when you realize that the membership of the CFR includes top executives from the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, the Knight newspaper chain, NBC, CBS, Time, Life, Fortune, Businessweek, U.S. News and World Report, and many others, you can be sure that such anonymity is not accidental. It is deliberate. They control or own major newspapers, magazines, radio, and television networks, and they control the most powerful companies in the book publishing business. Nearly every U.S. president since its inception has been a CFR member. Even the non-CFR presidents have had administrations full of members. For instance, Ronald Reagan wasn't a CFR member, but his vice president George Bush was CFR, and so were 28 members of his transition team alone. George W. Bush was not a CFR member either, but his father and uncle are. His vice president Dick Cheney is, and his administration is swarming with them. At the founding meeting of the United Nations, there were 74 CFR members. The Clinton administration had over 100 CFR members. The Nixon administration had over 115 CFR members, all in key executive branch positions, most of whom continued through the Ford years, and a few of whom are still in power today. The Council on Foreign Relations, like Skull and Bones, always promotes candidates from both the Democrat and Republican parties, thus ensuring a win for the New World Order. In 1952 and 1956, CFR Republican Dwight Eisenhower ran against CFR Democrat Adlai Stevenson. In 1960, it was CFR Republican Richard Nixon against CFR Democrat John F. Kennedy. In 1964, neither candidate was CFR, but Barry Goldwater was a Freemason, and Lyndon Johnson's administration was full of CFR members. In 1968, it was CFR Republican Richard Nixon versus CFR Democrat Hubert Humphrey. In 1972 was Nixon again versus CFR Democrat George McGovern. In 1976, CFR Republican Gerald Ford lost to CFR Democrat Jimmy Carter. In 1980 was Mason Republican Ronald Reagan versus CFR Democrat Jimmy Carter and CFR Independent John Anderson. 1984 was Reagan again against CFR Democrat Walter Mondale. In 1988, CFR Republican George Bush ran against CFR Democrat Michael Dukakis. 1992 was Bush again running against CFR Democrat Bill Clinton. In 1996, Clinton was challenged by CFR Republican Bob Dole. In 2000, CFR Democrat Al Gore lost to Skull and Bones Republican George W. Bush, with CFR running mate Dick Cheney. In 2004, Bush was challenged by Brother Bonesman and CFR Democrat John Kerry. The CFR owns the monopoly market on both presidents and presidential candidates. In the 2008 presidential race, the CFR propped up Democrats Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, John Edwards, and Republicans Rudy Giuliani, John McCain, Mitt Romney, and Fred Thompson. In 2012, Both frontrunners, Mitt Romney and Barack Obama, were both CFR. Dr. Carroll Quigley wrote, "The chief problem of American political life has been how to make the two congressional parties more national and international. The argument that the two parties should represent opposed ideals and policies, one perhaps of the right and the other of the left, is a foolish idea acceptable only to doctrinaire and academic thinkers. Instead, the two parties should be almost identical, so that the American people can throw the rascals out at any election without leading to any profound or extensive shifts in policy." The Chicago Tribune editorial on December 9, 1950 wrote, "The members of the Council on Foreign Relations are persons of much more than average influence in their community. They have used the prestige that their wealth, their social position, and their education have given them to lead their country toward bankruptcy and military debacle. They should look at their hands. There is blood on them, the dried blood of the last war, and the fresh blood of the present one, the Korean War." Almost all CIA directors have been CFR members, including Allen Dulles, Richard Helms, William Colby, George Bush, William Webster, James Woolsey, John Deutsch, and William Casey. Many U.S. senators were also members, including David Boren, William Bradley, John Chafee, William Cohen, Christopher Dodd, Bob Graham, Joseph Lieberman, George Mitchell, Claiborne Pell, Larry Pressler, Charles Robb, John D. Rockefeller, and William Roth Jr. For U.S. congressional representatives, there has been Howard Berman, Thomas Foley, Sam Gedgenson, Richard Gephardt, Newt Gingrich, Amory Houghton Jr., Nancy Lee Johnson, John Lewis, Robert Matsui, Dave McCurdy, Eleanor Holmes Norton, Thomas L. Petrie, Carlos Romero Barcelo, Patricia Schroeder, Peter Smith, Olympia Snowe, John Spratt, and Louis Stokes. As for Secretaries of Defense, Neil McElroy, Robert Gates, Robert McNamara, Melvin Laird, Elliot Richardson, Donald Rumsfeld, Harold Brown, Caspar Weinberger, Frank Carlucci, and Dick Cheney. And U.S. ambassadors to Australia, Britain, Chile, Czech Republic, France, India, Italy, Japan, Korea, Mexico, Nigeria, Philippines, Poland, Romania, Russia, Spain, South Africa, and Syria. This is just a sampling of the high-level government positions held by hundreds, if not thousands, of CFR members. As Robert Anton Wilson said, if the CFR had millions of members, like, say, the Presbyterian Church, this list might not mean much. But the CFR only has 3,200 members. And Gary Allen wrote, "The plan, as publicly stated by the CFR's Richard Gardner, part-time State Department functionary and Columbia University professor of law and international organization, amounts to this. Instead of trying to make the UN a complete world dictatorship immediately, the establishment will identify different problems in different countries. Then, they will propose a solution, which can only be achieved by some kind of international agency, so that each country concerned will be forced to surrender another segment of its national independence. Gardner considers this piecemeal approach the practical road to the end of nationhood." The Bilderberg Group is an annual conference of elites so secretive it was nameless until being coined the Bilderberg Group after its original meeting place. They first convened in 1954 at the Bilderberg Hotel in Holland under direction of Prince Bernhard and David Rockefeller. There is a core of 39 regulars with nearly 130 elites in politics, banking, business, and the media invited each year. Paul Joseph Watson wrote, "Surely senior officials of the World Trade Organization, Federal Reserve, financial institutions like Rockefeller, the man himself, the EU and UN world government models, and corporate oil conglomerates couldn't belong to the same group as the leading politicians and the media. Well, they do. They all belong to the Bilderberg Group. Alex Jones wrote, in 1954, the elite of the world met in secret at the Bilderberg Hotel in Holland. The Bilderberg Group would later admit that their mission was the formation of the EU. Once the EU was established, under the guise of trade deals, a North American Union and Asian Union would be formed. The three interlocking superstates form the core of the world government, while the United Nations would serve as a world regulatory and enforcement body over the Third World subregions. The Bilderberg Group consists of the heads of all the managing roundtable groups that steer individual countries. Picture the elite power structure of the world as a giant pyramid, with only the elite of the elite at the tip-top of the capstone. The group has been so secretive that until the mid-1980s, the controlled corporate media denied its existence. Into the late 1990s, coverage only consisted of rare one-line mentions, but with the rise of the alternative media, their stranglehold on information has begun to slip. In the Illuminati hierarchy, Bilderberg Group is above and controls the Council on Foreign Relations, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, and the Trilateral Commission. It is composed of kings, queens, princes and princesses, presidents and prime ministers from all over the world, IMF, World Bank, and Federal Reserve heads, U.S. senators, CFR members, EU commissioners, Rockefellers, Rothschilds, journalists, TV news anchors, CEOs, and more. The last 6 heads of NATO have been from the Bilderberg Group. In 1991, Bill Clinton was invited, and the next year became president. Hillary has also been to Bilderberg. Other notable attendees include Margaret Thatcher, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, Dan Quayle, Alan Greenspan, Gerald Ford, Henry Kissinger, Richard Pearl, Donald Rumsfeld, Colin Powell, William Perry, Prince Charles, Prince Philip, King Juan Carlos and Queen Sofia of Spain, Queen Beatrix and Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, Peter Jennings, Rupert Murdoch, William F. Buckley Jr., Nelson J. and David Rockefeller, Jacob, Guy, Evelyn, Emma, and Lynn Rothschild, Sigmund, and Eric Warburg. Gary Allen wrote, the Bilderbergs meet once or sometimes twice a year. Those in attendance include leading political and financial figures from the United States and Western Europe. Prince Bernhard makes no effort to hide the fact that the ultimate goal of the Bilderbergers is a world government. In the meantime, while the New World Order is being built, the Bilderbergers coordinate the efforts of the European and American power elites. Prince Bernhard's counterpart among the American Bilderbergers is David Rockefeller, chairman of the board of the CFR, whose economic base is the giant Chase Manhattan Bank and Standard Oil. Among the other Bilderbergers from the world of ultra-high finance are Baron Edmund de Rothschild of the House of Rothschild, C. Douglas Dillon of Dillon Read and Company, Robert McNamara of the World Bank, Sir Eric Roll of S.G. Warburg and Company, Pierce Paul Schweitzer of the International Monetary Fund, and George Ball of Lehman Brothers. Every single one of those named as past and present members of the Bilderberger Steering Committee is or was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. If you have never heard of Bilderberg, it's likely because the heads of CNN, Fox News, Newsweek, Time, The Washington Post, The Wall Street Journal, and many other media outlets are regular attendees. Protesters and journalists are kept well at bay by private police. No one is allowed anywhere near for coverage, and no minutes of the meetings are made public. Alex Jones wrote, now the Bilderberg Group in Reuters, which they own, has gone public that it actually grooms our presidents and our prime ministers. That, yes, its members really are international bankers. Yes, royal families are involved. Yes, the Bilderberg Group runs the central banks. And yes, the elitists see us as the property of a world superstate. Bilderberg member Prince Philip, in his own publication, If I Were an Animal, brags about how he would kill 80% of the population, how his great dream is to come back as a virus. Gary Allen wrote, Of course, the landscape painters merely brush the Bilderbergers right out of existence and focus the public's attention on something like the conditions in the prisons or Coke bottles littering the highways. Since the Bilderbergers are a group of the left, they are allowed to go on in peace and quiet, planning for 1984. The fact that there is heavy Rockefeller, Chase Manhattan Bank, and CFR influence in the media might also have something to do with the fact that while everybody has heard of, say, the John Birch Society, and almost always in a derogatory manner from the Eastern establishment media, practically nobody has heard of the Bilderbergers. Researcher and author Daniel Estulin has followed the Bilderberg Group for over 15 years, and recently published a highly recommended expose called The True Story of the Bilderberg Group. Journalist Jim Tucker has been following Bilderberg for more than 30 years, and attended and staked out over 20 meetings. In Alex Jones's Bilderberg documentary, Endgame, Jim Tucker mentions his original disbelief such a group could exist without his knowledge. He said, "I first heard about Bilderberg in 1975, and I said, I don't believe it. It's not possible. Who in the hell is Bilderberg? I spent 20 happy years with metropolitan newspapers, all the wires clicking in my ear. That could not happen without me knowing about it. The newspapers totally ignore it. Not a word. Total blackout in the United States. Since then, I've never stopped pursuing Bilderberg and the whole international gangster organization led by Rockefellers and Rothschilds as they manipulate the world for their own selfish interests." So why the media blackout? Why the secret meeting places, tinted windows, private police, and roaming guards? Jim Tucker says, the reason they want secrecy is because they're doing evil. Evil is done in darkness. Good works are done in sunshine. Or as C. Gordon Tether said, if the Bilderberg Group is not a conspiracy of some sort, it is conducted in such a way as to give a remarkably good imitation of one. Jim Marrs wrote, if the CFR, the Trilateral Commission, and the Bilderbergers are simply innocent, well-intentioned people working to bring about a peaceful and prosperous world, as they claim, then why all the secrecy? Why all the front organizations, some of which are the antithesis of others? Why do they obviously distrust public attention? Which leads to the single most important question. If they do create a centralized one-world government, what's to prevent some tyrant from taking control? The Trilateral Commission was founded by David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski in July 1973, and is composed of approximately 325 elites in business, banking, and politics. The Trilateral Commission is propagated as being an economic cooperation between America, Europe, and Japan, but in reality is another secretive society and organization, this one specializing in creating the trilateral economic interdependence necessary to bring in the New World Order system of world currency and world governance. They are setting up the framework and power structure necessary for these multinational banks and corporations to assume total control, dominating the world's populations, governments, and economies. Alex Christopher wrote, the Trilateral Commission is an international organization founded by David Rockefeller, who also had a part in the founding of the Council on Foreign Relations, and who is chairman of the board. The Trilateral Commission is the Illuminati's attempt to unite Western Europe's common market, Japan, Canada, and the United States into an economic and political confederacy. What they couldn't do through the political side of the Illuminati, Council on Foreign Relations, they are now trying through the economic approach. Anthony Sutton wrote, the Trilateral Commission was founded by the persistent maneuvering of David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski. Rockefeller, then chairman of the ultra-powerful Chase Manhattan Bank, a director of many major multinational corporations and endowment funds, has long been a central figure in the mysterious Council on Foreign Relations. Brzezinski, a brilliant prognosticator of one-world idealism, has been a professor at Columbia University and the author of several books that have served as policy guidelines for the CFR. Brzezinski served as the Trilateral Commission's executive director from its inception in 1973 until late 1976, when he was appointed by President Carter as Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs. Some notable members of the Trilateral Commission include George Bush, Dick and Lynn Cheney, Bill Clinton, Al Gore, Jimmy Carter, Walter Mondale, David Rockefeller, Zbigniew Brzezinski, Henry Kissinger, David Gergen, Richard Holbrooke, Madeleine Albright, Robert McNamara, Paul Volcker, Alan Greenspan, and Paul Wolfowitz. U.S. Senators Dianne Feinstein, Robert Taft Jr., Charles Robb, William Cohen, and John Glenn. Congressmen, ambassadors, secretaries of Treasury, State, and many other political figures are trilateralists. There are also many banking institutions represented at trilateral meetings, including the European Central Bank, World Bank, IMF, the Federal Reserve, Chase Morgan, Citibank, Bank of America, Bank One, Bank of Tokyo, Bank of Japan, and more. Also, plenty of multinational corporate interests are represented, including Fuji Xerox, Goldman Sachs, AIG, ExxonMobil, Shell, Chevron, Texaco, Sony, Samsung, Comcast, Time Warner, Carlyle Group, Levi Strauss, Daikin, Sara Lee, GE, GM, Ford, Chrysler, Toyota, Mitsubishi, Johnson & Johnson, IBM, Boeing, and Citigroup. Laurie Strand wrote, "Many of the original members of the Trilateral Commission are now in positions of power where they are able to implement policy recommendations of the Commission, recommendations that they themselves prepared on behalf of the Commission. It is for this reason that the Commission has acquired a reputation for being the shadow government of the West. The Trilateral Commission's tentacles have reached so far in the political and economic sphere that it has been described by some as a cabal of powerful men out to control the world by creating a supranational community dominated by the multinational corporations." Senator Barry Goldwater wrote, "David Rockefeller's newest international cabal, the Trilateral Commission, is intended to be the vehicle for multinational consolidation of the commercial and banking interests by seizing control of the political government of the United States. The Trilateral Commission represents a skillful, coordinated effort to seize control and consolidate the four centers of power: political, monetary, intellectual, and ecclesiastical. All this is to be done in the interest of creating a more peaceful, more productive world community. What the Trilateralists truly intend is the creation of a worldwide economic power superior to the political governments of the nation-states involved. They believe the abundant materialism they propose to create will overwhelm existing differences. As managers and creators of the system, they will rule the future." During the birth of the Trilateral Commission was the U.S. Carter administration, which was full of members. President Jimmy Carter and Vice President Walter Mondale were trilateralists. Carter's Secretaries of State, Defense, and Treasury, Vance Brown and Blumenthal, were all members. Carter's National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski co-founded the commission, and on top of that, Carter placed 26 other members into senior administrative positions. Brzezinski wrote of the commission in his book Power and Principle, saying, "Contrary to the myth, the Trilateral Commission is not a conspiracy designed to dominate the world, but genuinely strives to engage Americans, Western Europeans, and Japanese in a common endeavor to shape a more cooperative world." In the same book, he wrote, "All the key foreign policy makers of the Carter administration had previously served in the Trilateral Commission." The next president, Ronald Reagan, was not a trilateral member, but his vice president George Bush was, and so were many men in his administration. After Reagan was 8 years of Bush the trilateralist, then 8 years of Clinton the trilateralist, both of whom appointed dozens of other members to high-level positions. Bush Jr. is not a member, but his father is, his Vice President Cheney is, and he has appointed members to his cabinet. At a Trilateral Commission meeting in 1991, David Rockefeller actually said, "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity during those years. But the work is now much more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries. Dr. Johann Koppel said, "The interests behind the Bush administration, such as the CFR, the Trilateral Commission, and the Bilderberg Group, have prepared for and are now moving to implement open world dictatorship within the next 5 years. In 1983, I warned of a takeover of world governments being orchestrated by these people. There was an obvious plan to subvert true democracies, and selected leaders were not being chosen based upon character, but upon their loyalty to an economic system run by elites and dedicated to preserving their power. All we have now are pseudo-democracies."